Hi, everybody. My name is Hadley Solomon. I am a senior recruiter for Creative Alignments. And I know Daniel's given you a little bit of an overview. We are based in Boulder, Colorado, but we are now a fully remote company, so we have recruiters nationwide. Our mission is working with companies that are doing good in the world, but we really do focus on three general areas of practice in consumer product goods, also technology and climate and sustainability companies that are trying to address that issue. You can see on this slide that we've been recognized by a number of organizations. We've been noted as a best place to work and a number of different lists of Outside Magazine and such. And we were made into a B Corp last year. Oh dear, hold on a second. Can you still see the presentation?
Yeah, it went a little funny.
Yeah, I'm not sure what happened there. Let me try to fix that. Apologize.
Sure.
We do have that hourly model and are not contingency based, as Daniel mentioned. But really what that ends up meaning for our clients is that we are partners with them and really become just sort of an embedded part of the hiring process and act as the recruiting arm of their company, which ends up being about 50% less, at least, than traditional recruiting. In addition to wanting to focus on companies that are doing good in the world, another part, and this is, I think, really relevant to the people on this call, is that we really want to promote the idea that work should be additive to people's lives. And we really do think that that starts even with the recruiting process. So I'm looking forward to talking to you all about that and how you do that as a company. I'd just like to sort of show you a few of the companies we've worked with. We've had a great history with a lot of startup brands like you guys. So we started 14 years ago in the natural product space in Boulder and started with RX Bar when they were very small, about 10 people, and became their recruiting partner all the way through their exit, hiring about 31 people, which then introduced us to Halo Top, and we grew their company by about 90 people. And then things just grew from there. And we became really kind of known as a great resource for this industry. We've worked with Fourth and Heart, Jackfruit Company, Olipop, Cauliflower, Choco Love. But I'm certainly happy to answer questions about that later in our call. I know you're here to learn about how you guys can start this process yourselves and give you a few of those sort of tips for how to do that. So we'll go over sort of big picture considerations and creating your plan. We'll go over, how do you craft a compelling job ad? How do you get people to find your brand and understand your place is a great place to work? How do you put together a comp package? And then how do you find those candidates? So we'll go through all of those and more in the next 30 minutes or so. So what is the big picture? So it's going to be tempting, most likely, when you're getting started and you've identified, I need this first person, I need this person to come in and help me with, this particular part of my business. I'm ready to get moving. But we would really advise you to be very intentional at the beginning by putting together a plan. Invest the time to get some of those foundational things in place early. Because long term, it will save you time and money and really could make a huge difference in your company's success. So at each step of your recruiting process, you're going to be building your reputation as an employer. And in that, even little things can make a big difference. And I'd just like to go over, and we'll get a little bit deeper into it as we talk, but three kind of primary areas in terms of building that reputation. Your employee brand, recruitment marketing, and employee value proposition. So your employee brand is your reputation as an employer. And that makes a big difference in your hiring and bringing candidates to the four. So it's hard to be in control of that because there are, avenues through which candidates can give feedback, employees like Glassdoor and things like this. But you can do a lot to build a strong employment brand. So each touch point you have with a candidate is an opportunity to build that. Operating with respect, remembering that the person on the other side of the process is a human being and has their own goals and nerves and things that they're trying to achieve with their work life. So that is one way that you can influence your employee brand. Recruitment marketing is essentially your marketing campaign as an employee, as an employer. So just like you're marketing your product, the same channels work with marketing your brand as an employer. So you're going to use your website, you're going to use social media, you might have partnerships that are going to do that, but that's what is important for getting your brand out there so that candidates know of your company and want to work there. And then with employee value proposition, you want to be prepared to present your opportunity to a candidate. So before you get started, think about things from the candidate's perspective. What are they going to want to know? What's going to be compelling to them about working for your company? So having these things in place before you get started on your job search, on your recruiting, is really going to make it easier, more streamlined, and really establish your brand in the marketplace. Another thing in the ways of the big picture is to really think about how diversity fits into your goals with your hires. So there's a lot of work that's being done to diversify the natural products industry. There are a number of organizations that are working on that, the Jedi Collective and Project Potluck. There's a Naturally Networks Minority-Owned Fellowship. And as employers, you can be a part of that. And there are a number of reasons why it makes sense to consider this at the front end and also, throughout your building of your team. I mean, one, we know that all humans are humans, and it's the right thing to do to make sure that, everybody is treated with the same respect. But practically speaking, the dynamics of our society are changing. It's becoming a much more diverse. So your consumers are more diverse. The workforce is more diverse. It's where business is going. So having that in mind at the front end and knowing how to really enhance that on your own team is really important. There's also a lot of... Oh.
I think a lot of brands I've talked to, like they are really committed to wanting to have a diverse workforce. And I know I've experienced this. Sometimes it's a little tricky to try to get diverse candidates if you just kind of go the traditional methods of like, let me post this on LinkedIn because probably my LinkedIn network is looks like me, like more likely to, and same for other people. Especially with some roles that I would say like sales roles or operations roles, like it's harder to source, I think, really good candidates for that. So what can people do to I think the onus is on us. Like we need to get out and put in the effort to go in and try to source great diverse candidates. What are some ways that people can do that?
Yeah, so there are a number of sort of professional organizations that have an orientation towards certain diverse populations. So those places have job boards. They also have places where people can register for them. Oftentimes candidates will include their participation or membership in those organizations in their LinkedIn profile. And so that is something that you can actually search, even in a standard, your everyday LinkedIn page, not as a special recruiter seat, but you can do a search in LinkedIn with what we call Boolean language, which is, sounds a little bit fancier than it actually is. It's really quite easy to use. And if you put in the name of those organizations in a search along with an and connector that is the name of the role or the skill that you're looking for, it will bring up candidates. So that's one way.
That would be like on LinkedIn that you could do that?
Yes.
So you could type in Project Potluck and operations, and that could help you find some candidates. Cool.
That's right. And when you do that, if you want sort of both words, you know, that phrase to be searched entirely, you'd put quotation marks around project potluck and capitalize and then put that you want. And we can go a little bit into Boolean strings and how that works. If we have time at the end, I'd be happy to talk a little bit more about that. So that's one way. The other thing that I would say is, you know, and this might be in my notes later, but since we're on this topic, I'll go ahead and address it. Once you have a candidate pipeline or a group of candidates that you have collected that are going to start participating in your hiring process, there's also been a lot of research about how having a diverse pool, even if you don't end up hiring necessarily that diverse candidate, having a diverse pool increases the likelihood of building a diverse team by 50 to 75%. And what that means is, if you have 4 people and you have a diversity goal around gender representation or race representation, having 2 at least of that representation in a candidate pool is where you get that biggest bang for a buck. It doesn't necessarily have to be, you know, 5 out of 6 even, but just having at least 2 in a group of 4, 5, 6, 8 candidates will dramatically increase the possibility of hiring or building a diverse team.
Great, thanks.
Yeah. So let's talk about a little bit of the nitty gritty. And now that you've had your plan in place, you are chomping at the bit to get that next hire in. So having that hiring plan, not just about the next role, but the next few roles, like the team that you're going to be building, really can result in a financial gain as well, because investors invest in people. And during the early stages, they want to see who's going to be executing on your plan. And so having a people plan is really important. Make sure that if you are seeking funding, make sure that you have salary as a budget line item, you know, both the cost to hire and the salary for the role.
Hadley, are you on the next slide?
Oh, I'm sorry, I am. Let me advance. I apologize.
Yep.
When you're thinking about, you know, who those people are, what those roles are, really honestly evaluate what your strengths are already as a team or as a founder, and where there might be gaps. So what skills or traits are going to complement yours? So oftentimes founders are visionaries, and sometimes, you know, they're the salespeople. They're out there telling the story, and they need somebody as a partner or an early hire who is very detail oriented and process oriented. So you will want to have, you know, perhaps an operations hire, and since the founder is usually out there, you know, telling that story. You want to think about your short-term needs and your long-term needs. So will the person that you're hiring today have the skill set to grow with your company? And then, you know, where can you look at using outside partners for early parts of your company? So you can outsource certain skills or areas like HR or accounting. You could look at a fractional chief financial officer and not hire a permanent person, because what you need today might not be what you need in that role later. And you don't necessarily want to spend all of your budget on those operational costs from an internal operations, not in terms of your product. Sorry. Let's see. Another, you know, consideration is what's going to put you in the best position to hire your next priority person. So if your first objective is, you know, getting money in the door, you can't grow that without sales. So what's going to get you to your revenue, and who can help you do that? That can be another consideration in that first hire. Some other considerations might be how you manufacture. If you are looking at doing in-house manufacturing versus a co-managed resource, that might affect who your first hires are, how you go to market, and whether you're doing retail or direct to consumer. The hiring strategy might be that you are hiring your leaders first and allowing them to build the team and select the people they want. But you could go a different direction and have functional contributors and then hire leaders as you grow, and you need that skill more. If your product has a shorter shelf life, you'll want you'll want the ops side to be up and running before you start selling, because you need to have those processes in place. So those are just some of those considerations about who you bring on first. Okay, so how do you get those people? This is the recruitment marketing piece that I was talking about. So crafting a clear and accurate job description is really important. You want to make sure that you're not wasting time with people who aren't interested in all of the responsibilities of this role. You want to make sure that the conversation you have with a candidate is, gets off on the right foot, where they know exactly what is expected. One common mistake sometimes that happens in early stage companies is that you kind of need people to wear a lot of hats. And while that's certainly expected in a startup, you don't want to go overboard. You don't want to, meld a whole bunch of roles into one, because that lack of focus can really slow down your company. Another thing to consider when you're creating a job description is something we were just talking about, Daniel and I, about getting that diverse pool. There are ways to craft your job description that will attract a more diverse group of people. So, one thing might be, what are your hard requirements? Do you really need somebody to have a 4-year degree? Or could job experience replace that? And if it could, that requirement probably doesn't need to be in your job description, because people will self-select out. And we find that particularly in diverse groups, women and people of color will often self-select themselves out of a job description or a job application if they don't meet every requirement. So that's where being flexible and knowing, what really is going to add to your team in a meaningful way is really important. What does the ideal candidate need to know on day one of their job, and what can be learned? Where can you consider aspirational candidates, people who have some experience but are really hungry to learn and can grow, because that can be more affordable for you in hiring that first person. So one example of that would be somebody who has been a teacher and might not have had experience in exactly your area of your product, but have really strong communication skills, good problem solving, the ability to speak publicly with ease, and be really creative, look at things from different perspectives. Teachers are excellent at that. And sometimes, they're ready to leave that profession and make a change into industry. So that's one example of thinking a little bit outside the box in terms of what types of candidates you consider. When you create a job description, I'm sure, all of us have seen the job descriptions where are just a ton of text and it's, a long written document. Creating a job ad is really good for search engine optimization. It helps people find it. It makes that posting easy to find. So using keywords is one really good strategy. And the way you do that is think about if you could describe your ideal candidate in 5 words, what would they be? And make sure that they're in your job ad, because those people will be looking for those words and will come across your opportunity.
Hadley, what about like where to post the JD? Because like the example you have here on the right is, very nice thing built out on somebody's website. Some of us might like we don't have the web traffic to necessarily source a lot of people that way. I think maybe what I've done, I've created it on LinkedIn before using their own thing, and then I think they changed the rules so that you can only get like 20 applicants through their form, and then they try to start charging you. And I don't know, so many of the applicants I got through the LinkedIn stuff were like just super random people.
Mhm. Yes.
Um, and then so I switched to then doing a Google form, which then I would post on LinkedIn, stuff
Mhm.
like that. What do you typically recommend for people, or what have you seen work?
Well, I mean, I have seen LinkedIn be effective. One way, you can do that, get around some of that is having some screening questions, and or even a short sort of work exercise, and that can really avoid sort of those auto apply types of scenarios. Um, I haven't used a lot myself because we are posting through our website. But I would definitely, I'd be happy to do a little bit of research about just sort of how Indeed works, for posting opportunities. Google Jobs is certainly another one. I think
Yeah.
that is being really widely used. But I'm not sure what the filtering capabilities are on some of those
I had a
sites.
lot of luck with Indeed for maybe more like tactical roles or kind of specific stuff, like looking for a field manager
Mhm.
or like a sales rep that to hit local stores or something like that. And it was free too, so it was a really good place to post those.
Yeah, yeah. What I would say is I just am not sure if they have the screening capabilities that LinkedIn does, to ask screening questions and kind of have a gateway before applying. So we'll look into that a little bit. Maybe we can follow up with you on that, and we could provide that to
Great.
today's attendees. Um, Lastly, we're talking about job posting. Make sure that on your company website you have a careers page, because a lot of times when people are posting on LinkedIn or Indeed and they're applying through that vehicle, they're skipping, seeing they might go to research your brand via your own website, and it will be very good for your employment brand to have a careers page that mirrors what you have posted. It just gives you legitimacy. It makes candidates more confident that they are applying for a real company. Because as a small company, it's important to establish that and make sure that that candidates understand that. Um, Sorry, I did skip over one thing that's in this slide that I just mentioned real quickly. The language bias, that is a free tool. There's a gender decoder, and you can literally copy and paste your entire job description into it, and it will tell you whether or not your language in that job description is male heavy, female heavy, neutral. It's a really quick, easy thing to do. And it gives you advice on how to replace words that might lean one way or the other, and help with crafting that job description in a more neutral way. Um, okay, so again, thinking about the employee value proposition, you want to make sure that you have a good compensation package that both aligns with your financial plan and with what the market is bearing for that type of role. So oftentimes as with a startup, you can't necessarily match the salary of a large company that is established, but there are other aspects of the package that can be very appealing to candidates. So what else do you offer that's of value? And again, this is thinking about things from the employee's perspective. Is it going to be growth that they're looking for? Is it going to be, leadership opportunity? Are there, ownerships or equity opportunities with your role? Or do you have a really compelling sort of message or mission? That can also be very persuasive to a candidate. Another thing to consider is if you are located in an expensive market and don't need to have all of your employees in that space, there's a lot of opportunity to appeal to candidates in other markets that have a lower cost of living, which can save you money in your hiring. And so if you're hiring somebody in the Midwest, they're not going to have necessarily the same salary expectations as somebody in San Francisco. So if you have the ability to do things, hire remotely, that's one, opportunity for a startup company. Think about what level at which you want to hire. There are different risk tolerances for different roles and different types of candidates. So somebody in an earlier career stage might have less experience, but they're a little bit more open to risk, or they're open to some of these other elements of a compensation package other than salary. If you're looking at more senior leaders, there could be less risk tolerance, and so those are some of the things to consider when you're crafting your package and for the type of role. Something to be aware of when you are putting together a job description or a job ad. There are state pay equity laws that vary across the country, and this is something that is changing every year with every different state. So in Colorado, for instance, there's a requirement that the salary for a position is posted with the role. California, I believe, is the same. I know that Rhode Island has a slightly different rule where if a candidate asks, then it needs to be told, but it doesn't necessarily have to be published. So be aware of those different rules depending on where you're located, and it's very easy to Google and find that information.
And then I understand that the range can't be also just too great. Like you can't just put 50 to 150K. I don't know. We'll figure it out based on how little we think we can pay you or something, right?
Right.
Yeah, and I know we'll get into in a second, like how to actually figure out what that range is.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say, some states legislate that, some don't. Some make it very sort of fuzzy about, having that wide range. I would say my advice to anyone, though, is even if it's not required that you don't have one, I would say it's also in your best interest to not have a wide range, because it is not going to be an efficient hiring process for you if you have a really wide range of salary possibilities.
And what's the state laws like? Is that just based on where your company headquarter is, right? 'Cause like even if you're hiring people remotely, you're posting it online.
That also varies state to state. The legislation is really specific in each of those. So I think when it started out in Colorado, my understanding was if you posted the role and it was possible for the person to live and work in Colorado, you had to put the salary range in there. I think that those are evolving all the time, and that actually that may no longer be the case. I know that was the case 2 years ago, but it is tricky and something to, I think for the most part, it is based on where the company is located or headquartered. But there are specific states who have specific rules about that also.
Got it.
Okay. So researching compensation. So as we were just talking about, that is a requirement for some states. There's some benefit to you as company leaders in those rules as well. Mainly that you can look at other job postings and see what those salary ranges are. So it's a pretty easy way to research if you happen to be located in a state where that is a requirement. If you live in a state where that's not the case, you can look at other, at job sites that are national, like Indeed, and look for similar roles that are located in those other states to get that information. You can also look at Glassdoor or salary.com to find those. But I would suggest that you really, take those with a grain of salt because there's a lot of data going into those that it may not actually be relevant or directly related to exactly what you are hiring.
Yeah, I've used Indeed. I find that really helpful because you can filter it by the job description as well as the city where they are. So if you want to find how much a salesperson is like a sales manager makes in San Francisco, you can do it and look for like the national average.
Yep. Yeah. And I, again, I would just say, really see those as estimates, because there is a wide range there. Another thing you can do is, talk to other people in your industry, that you're networked with. And, as I'm sure there are many organizations sort of like Startup CPG that, where people are all sort of trying to do the same things. And so those conversations about what people are learning about compensation and the trying to hire, that can be really, really useful. Also, as you're conducting your hiring process, get candidate feedback on it and incorporate that into your thinking. It's okay to have some of those conversations up front and be just really authentic and genuine about it. It does, again, it really helps establish your employment brand when you deal very openly and transparently with candidates. Because time is precious to everyone, and we want to make sure that people are pursuing things that are real possibilities for them.
I like the idea of asking like founders who maybe are in the city that you're talking about or have hired people there, or just if it's remote or whatever. And then also maybe asking some people that who do that job. Like
Mhm.
if you're hiring a sales director, you could ask other sales director and then calibrate both of them because founders are probably going to say, well, like it should be less. And the person in the role is going to be like, well, it should be more because I want
Right.
that much also. So yeah, everything with a grain of salt, but I like the triangulation.
Yep, for sure. And if you're really struggling and feeling like you don't have the data you need, you can work with human resources consultants, and they can do an official salary survey for you. But that can be expensive. So it would be something that you would need to really strongly consider whether that was worth that investment. Okay. Um, Finding candidates. So I think, doing this yourself is probably the trickiest part. This is, you guys are founders, you're visionaries, you have product ideas, and you're not recruiters. So this is where I hope, this is really, really helpful to you. So first of all, it is really important, as much as you are able, to both consider active and passive candidates. And an active candidate is someone who has applied to your job posting. They have expressed their interest and have thrown their hat in the ring. A passive candidate is someone who isn't looking. This is where doing that search on LinkedIn is really useful. And then sending out a connection request to that person. I'd really like to talk to you. I'm doing this. I like your background in that. And, I wonder if you'd be interested in learning more about my company and this opportunity. If you can, provide a link to a job description, that certainly, gets things moving. And then, as I mentioned earlier, there are industry job boards and job sites where people are posting their resumes. So that's sort of the in between. They haven't found your company to apply, but they are open and on the job market looking for opportunities. So that's another way of finding candidates. Um, that's going to be helpful in terms of those people's interests and experience. But looking outside that possibility into other industries can help diversify and bring different experiences into your organization. So something to also keep in mind, to not be too narrow. Um, when you are thinking about your next hires and you've been watching sort of your industry and which companies have done well, you know, do a little research, a little intel on, are there companies who scaled really quickly and then had to lay some people off? That kind of story can be useful. You can search for people who are employed by that actual company on LinkedIn using that Boolean language. And then, putting your story out on social media, we're hiring, setting that setting on LinkedIn. There's a LinkedIn setting that shows we're hiring. It's a little purple, designation on your profile. So people can find you that way. Um, let's see. Another thing that we've seen be really, really effective for small companies is video. So if you have somebody on your team who was willing to make a really short video about what it's like to work there, that can be posted, shared. It can be on LinkedIn. It can be on your other socials. You can embed it on your website. That is also a really good way to attract candidates when they are researching your company. Um, let's see. I'm trying to think of let me make sure I'm not missing anything.
Yeah, I like this. I like the sound of that. I also, if anyone here has gotten a job or hired somebody off the startup CPG Slack, please put it in the comments. I think there are hundreds of people that I've met who have gotten stuff off there. I love it. That was our goal, to build the biggest free job board in the industry. And I like the most when people are prepared when they do it, so that they come in and post something that has all of the elements that we're talking about now, rather than someone being like, I'm looking for a salesperson. Anyone know anyone? And they don't even list like the city, it does, which does not help people help you. So, but I mean, that's, yeah, I love seeing that. And, yeah, I don't know. I've seen like mixed success with all of these ones, but I think those are all great sources for once you put together that nice, tight job description to hit all of those. I mean, like you can poach from other companies also. I don't know if sometimes people ask me that question, like, oh, but like there are other brands, like people are doing the same thing to you, just so you know. And it's your job to keep your good employees. And then, yeah, I mean, if you're thinking about like, if you want an experienced sales director, in my opinion, the experience only matters if it's directly related to your category currently, like they have those connections warm. Yeah, maybe reach out to a competitor's good salesperson and see if they want to jump ship. Otherwise, I kind of like the approach of maybe going with somebody who you don't need to pay as much, that doesn't have quite as much experience, if they're just going to be getting up to speed anyways.
Right, for sure. Okay, let's go to our next one. Once you have your candidates, how do you conduct a really solid interviewing process? So again, as we were talking about in the beginning, have a plan. It's really easy to think, well, we're just having a conversation and kick off that process without a lot of preparation. But it really will save you time in the long run if you have templates or even scorecards and a consistent process that gives you a really objective way to compare candidates. So if you feel like you are, considering a lot of candidates and your first, interview is, you like them all, or you're finding that have more than you can handle, you could also consider inserting into your hiring process a work exercise. And this is a little bit different than the screening questions I was talking about earlier, but actual like a fictional scenario that you might want a candidate to go through and produce a written response in some way that helps you evaluate their communication style, their critical thinking skills. It might be, if it's marketing related, it could be more creative, but some type of work exercise. And again, as Daniel was saying, really also assess candidates on whether or not they've researched your company. That can be another good screening or filter. In terms of your interview process, make sure that you are communicating really clearly to candidates what the timeline is going to be, what the steps in the process are going to be. Don't leave people hanging for many, many days. And this is again, going back to that building your employment brand, treating people with respect and really thinking about candidates, not just as things that are going to be inserted into your company and help you, but also as human beings who are looking for, a really great place to work and a place where work is additive to their lives. Some questions that can be really useful, behavioral interview questions. And you can just do a Google search on this to find ones that you think are really relevant to the role that you're hiring for. But some examples are, and I'm sure we've all had some questions like these in our interview processes. Describe a time where you were responsible for a task and you didn't receive training on it and you didn't know how to do it. Like, how did you handle that? Or give me an example of a time where you had a conflict with a team member and how you handled that. One question I like to ask candidates a lot is, tell me about a time where you saw something new you wanted to learn how to do, and you found a way to teach yourself how to do it. And it might be related to the job, but it might be a hobby or a skill or a new language. So, asking questions that are really going to kind of dig into the type of employee and the type of work they do. Let's
How do
see.
you, so if you're an early founder, like maybe this is even your first time and you don't necessarily know which exactly are the things you need out of this role. You're like, all right, we're scaling ops, like we need a good ops person. Like, how would you really even know what are the key traits? Otherwise, I can imagine those behavioral questions could just be like, well, what are the things I like about myself that I'm good at? All right, let me see if they're kind of like that. Or, how can you really know what are the key competencies that you need for a role if you haven't hired for that before, for example?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think studying a lot of other job descriptions is very informative. And, of companies like yours, who have, we were kind of talking about that earlier in the conversation about, how to prioritize what type of role you need. And so if you are aware of potential pitfalls, really kind of honing in on what would avoid that. And then also, as we were talking about earlier, like knowing what your strengths are, what are your gaps? And so it might not be, necessarily specific to the role. It might be specific to your company and your team and where your strengths are versus where you don't have, the super operational, detail oriented, process oriented person in place yet. You've got the vision, and I've even got suppliers, and I've got, maybe even my marketing plan or sales plan together. I'm going direct to consumer, et cetera. But I don't have the time or the skills to put together like a day-to-day operations plan.
Yeah. Got it.
Yeah. So that's what I would advise. Let's see. I think we're going to go to our last thing. And this is where you get to kind of your more mature spot as an employer and things are going well. And, you are finding that you are ready to hire multiple roles. You might need an applicant tracking system. And that is definitely, sort of next level. It's a good place to be. But you'll want to assess how it integrates with other parts of your company, whether or not that cost really makes sense. Can you combine tools? Like, are you going to need an HR system? Because sometimes those systems have a recruiting component where you can track applicants. One thing that's really nice about that is, especially as you're growing, if you're interviewing candidates and you have, potentially multiple people that you think would be good for a role, you can't hire all of them, but you know you're going to have future roles. It's a great way to have sort of a database, your own sort of pipeline of candidates that can contain notes from prior interviews. So you're not starting from scratch. It has their resume. You can reach out to them as soon as that opportunity is available. Smart Recruiters is a tool online. It's free. So they do have, it's, limited functionality. But if you're making, more than 5 hires a year, it could be really useful. I do have a company that's using Paylocity for payroll and HR, and they're using it now for their recruiting database as well, their applicant tracking system. So those are some options. And again, that's sort of that more mature step of having a lot of applicants. It can also connect to your careers page so that when people are applying, they're applying directly into your database rather than going through LinkedIn or Indeed, and that just boosts your employment brand, showing that you're a little bit more mature company.
One thing I always see on company websites is like, do we not have something that is what you're looking for? Email us, let us know, who you are, what you're up to. Do you see people actually get hired a lot from that, or companies decide like, yeah, you know what, this seems like a really good person to have at the organization, maybe we should try to bring them in.
Mhm.
Like, should early companies think about doing stuff like that versus just hiring for a specific role?
Um, my experience is that oftentimes companies do not have the bandwidth to monitor, sort of general requests. So they might have it out there, but they don't have somebody necessarily
Mhm.
internal who can really weed through those and then figure out how they match up with a role. So my experience is that it is more effective to have a defined role so that you're not spending a lot of time trying to either maybe fit a square peg into a round hole, for instance.
Yeah. Cool. Anyone else have other questions that they want to throw into the chat or the Q&A? Any other hiring related questions? Maybe one I'll put out is just about the negotiation process. So like any tips from you on, I think the worst kind of scenario to be in is, hey, I really like this candidate and they're just asking for more and I just want to pay them less. And like, then if you do get them, I mean, it's a sour start to the hiring process. So what do you see work really well for employers negotiating with candidates?
Yeah. I do think that, this is where that transparency comes in at the very beginning of the process. And I also think this is where, I know it's hard for employers to, feel like they have no room to negotiate because they publish their salary, in advance because they were required to. But at the end of the day, I do think it builds better relationships and a more transparent workplace, when those details are available upfront in the process.
Mhm.
Um, for exactly the reasons that you're describing, not wanting to have, a sour taste in your mouth when you start a new job because either you feel like you've overpaid for somebody or they feel like they are not being paid enough.
Yeah, got it. And then we had one question come in from the Q&A that I thought was pretty interesting. What's the best way to structure comp for commission sales roles, like base versus commission?
Yeah. Well, I think that varies a lot. I can tell you a couple of different models that I've seen. I've seen a 50-50 split. I've seen a 60-40 split of 50% um, uh, salary and then 50% commissions, and however you structure that commission. Um, I see that more in technology companies. Um, in more services companies, I see a bigger um, reliance on salary, and then a smaller bonus on sort of recurring revenue. But that's something I could do a little bit more research on, particularly on the CPG side, to kind of give you a little bit better answer. I'd be happy to follow up on that.
Great. Any other questions from the group here? All right. Cool. Hadley, well, I think we can wrap up just a few minutes early since I think we got through a lot. Thank you so much for preparing all those materials. I know that'll be very useful to everybody. And we sure do appreciate everyone's interest in the topic. And I just posted here again in the chat. If you guys want to chat with the Creative Alignments team, I really recommend it. If you're gonna, I mean, by all means, be scrappy, go and try to find the hire yourself. But I've done that, and then I've done it successfully and unsuccessfully. And then I reached out to a recruiter, and I did write that check, that like 25. I think I paid 25% of their salary, and it was horrible. That was honestly like second only to when I lived in New York and had to pay a broker to find an apartment for me, because that's just how New York City works. It's just so painful. It's like, oh, why? Now I have to pay them too. So, but Creative Alignments is just so much more affordable than anybody else out there. They are beloved by our community. So you can reach out to Hadley here, or I just posted again in the chat the email for Frank, and definitely mention our name. And yeah, thank you guys from Creative Alignments for being our partners.
Thank you. It was great to talk to all of you.
All right. Bye, everyone.